Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world tonight. Today, it's Grant Cameron, and this is Stanton Friedman Files, Episode 5. This has to do with the collection of files at the Provincial Archives in Fredericton, New Brunswick, which are reviewed in September of this year. And it's a massive collection, as you can see from one of the photographs that was provided to me by the archives. They are still busy filing, and this will go on for a number of years. I reviewed 15 of 22 archives boxes that had been, small archives boxes that had been done. And it appears I will be going back in June of next year for another round of viewing. I've photographed 6,000 pages so far, but because I have so many projects going at one time, I have sort of run into a problem of organizing the material that I've collected so far. In this one, I'll discuss a little bit about the metamaterials. This is a very popular subject now in the UFO community, and it has to do with metal that is being discovered all over the place and has been gathered. What most people always tend to forget is this has been going on for an awful long time by a number of researchers. This is nothing new. It is just sort of now gotten very popular. In this regard, there was a couple of stories about metamaterial. This is one that was provided by the archives. This is a letter that someone appears to have promised Stan a fragment of the Roswell crash. And this is a letter that was sent to Stan. I've taken off the name and the date and stuff like that. And this metal was provided. This is one of two cases in the files that Stan was involved with claims of Roswell metal. What I told the archives with this piece is to make sure that this piece is held securely, and they have a rule. There's, I think, 6 different items that in order to see them in the Stanton Friedman collection, you need an archivist with you when you're viewing that particular item in the collection. This is one of them, because I said, absolutely, this piece will take a walk unless you have this thing under constant security. Someone will walk off of this piece. So this is a piece that has not been analyzed. I have told them to hold off on that. I imagine eventually this will get analyzed, but as I maintain, it really is not going to prove anything. If it turns out to be anomalous, very strange, that's as far as you're going to go. You're going to say it's very anomalous, it's very strange. Somebody's going to come out and say it was made in a top secret black vault lab type thing run by the cabal, and it's pretty hard to disprove that. So it's just going to prove that it's weird, but this is one of the pieces that is in the Stanton Friedman collection. This is another piece that's has come out now. This is a piece that Colin Andrews is working with. Sounds like he's had it for quite a while. There's tests. Sounds a little bit positive that they have some sort of results. But again, no matter what is found out about this material, the most you're going to be able to analyze from this material is that it is anomalous. It's very weird. It doesn't appear to be made on Earth, but that's not the end of the case. And as I maintain, I believe this is going to be a port material that is being dropped by the intelligence behind the phenomena. I find it very hard to believe that flying saucers come across the galaxy and then little pieces like this start to fall off the flying saucer. This is from a lecture that Jacques Vallée did at Contact in the Desert, I believe it was a couple of years ago. He goes through a number of different pieces. And as you can see, there's been a number of pieces over the last 125 years that have been analyzed. They have been talked about. And there's a lot of this analysis and gathering of this material that's going on as we speak. This is, I'd like to bring this up because this is, a lot of people sort of disregard this. This is the first major UFO sighting of all times, and it involves one of these pieces. This is the Mauri Island mystery. And what happens is later on, people discounted this as a hoax. But if you realize that this happened 3 days before the case with Kenneth Arnold, you realize this was the first case. And when you look at the pattern of what happened during this experience, it fits in with a lot of cases that would happen later on. And it would be pretty hard to imagine that somebody would be able to get all the proper pieces of the story gathered and put it out before anybody else has told the story. This is the first story. And as I said, it matches a number of cases that would come forward later, especially the case that happened in South America, where a UFO, the same sort of thing, sort of explodes, pieces rain down. This is not an uncommon story. It happens quite often. So this is the Mauri Island case, which happened in June of 1947. This is a cartoon version of it. This is actually a photograph of Mauri Island off the west coast of the United States. This is a story where there are 6 objects. One of them seems to be in trouble. The others were circling around it when it happened. So this is a very common story where one of the UFOs appears to be in trouble, almost like a bird that pretends it's got a broken wing to get you away from the nest. It gets everybody's attention. It looks like it's going to crash. The other flying saucers are there. And then all the pieces start raining down. They have this material starts to come down. There's a couple of guys on a boat that are witnessing this whole thing. And you can see one guy gets hit in the arm with one of these pieces. This material is just raining down from this UFO, and they're trying to make it to shore. A dog that's in the boat gets hit by one of these pieces and it dies. They're leaving and it takes off, but one of the witnesses comes back 2 days later and the objects reappear, which is again a phenomena that was not known in 1947. Now we know that the phenomena seems to center around certain people, and that the person involved is also important. So it's not unusual that a person can see more than one UFO. In 1947, this was totally seen as a random phenomena. You do not see 2 UFOs. So the idea that you would go out a couple days later and see the UFOs again was totally preposterous. It's no longer preposterous. We know this is a pattern that does get involved. So basically, the metal pieces are gathered together. There was actually one sent to a university professor in Washington. I actually contacted this guy, and he was claiming it may have been a meteorite, which is kind of crazy stuff. He wouldn't respond to my letter. So basically what happens is this is reported to the U.S. Air Force, and U.S. Air Force intelligence picks up on this thing. They basically fly in 2 guys to look at this whole thing. And Kenneth Arnold was involved in the sighting as well. He would have the first UFO sighting. He was also involved in the research into the Mauri Island case. So the U.S. Air Force decides they've got this thing. They fly an Air Force, 2 Air Force officers in there. They take these a box of this pieces of material that had rained down on this boat and in the water, and they take it and fly out, and their plane crashes, which starts the first big UFO conspiracy story when this U.S. Air Force plane crashed. As I said, there's a lot. This is a 1945, a piece from a 1945 piece that Paola Harris has, a crash in New Mexico that occurred very close to the first atomic bomb explosion in 1945. I think this only happened a couple of days after. This is a piece that was cut off. It was analyzed in Mexico, and I think other people have this, but I'm not too sure what the final results are on these things. A lot of it is There's pieces disappearing for analysis, but there's not much analysis coming back the other way as to what's being discovered. This is a piece Chris Bledsoe had. He is apparently, it sounds like he has some interaction with a number of these pieces. This is one piece that he showed me. This is one that my assistant Desta Barnaby discovered in a collection from University of Arizona. From the James McDonald collection, this was a piece from 1939 in Illinois. This was an object that came flying out of the sky and embedded itself like a spike into the guy's garden. It was red hot, which we now know is a characteristic of apports. And I will maintain that the vast majority of these metals pieces will be apport material. This is not going to be pieces of a flying saucer that are going to tell you how to build a flying saucer. This stuff's being dropped on purpose. And what you see in this sort of recreation here is that the middle has a copper core, and that this 99% nickel is wound around the core in a sort of a windy fashion around there. It was given to the daughter of this guy in 1939 who discovered it. She lived in Tucson, and they had just opened a NASA lab because they were going to the moon, and she took it to the NASA lab. They did an analysis. University of Arizona was involved, and the Nickel Company of America, I believe, was involved. And all they could determine was that there were no aircraft parts that were made of 99% pure nickel, and they had no explanation of where this thing came from. But as I said, the key thing was that this thing was red hot when they discovered this thing. They had to wait for it to cool down before they could dig it out of the garden, which is a common characteristic of apport material stuff. And apport material is stuff that is moved around in a ghost situation. In UFO experiences have this, where the keys are moved around, cups are moved from one place in the room to another, coins are found, and it was found in the analysis that was done of some of them that after the object has apported from one place to another, it is actually heated up. So this was a characteristic of this piece that came out of the sky in 1939. This is a piece, this is the Bob White piece from the mid-1980s. And again, if you know the pattern, this thing was red hot when this thing, there was a UFO on the Utah-Colorado border. Bob White was there, and this thing shot this object out. He waited for it to cool down. He picked it up, and this thing has been in, I believe, better than 12 labs. It's 13, 14 labs, something like that. It rings like a bell. It's a very, very strange piece of metal, but it's another one where it's completely different metal, different types of characteristics, which is, I think, what the point is all these apports, all apports are different. There are no two apports that are the same. And basically, they just want you to go, wow. They want you to realize this is very weird material, almost like a crop circle. They want you to wonder, how could we possibly make this? This must be made somewhere else. And they get you thinking of the fact that you may not be alone. You're not the king of the castle in terms of the universe, that there are other intelligences that are sending us signals that we have much to learn about how reality works. This is a site in New Mexico. This is what was referred to in the American Cosmic book by some as the gifting field, where a bunch of metal was recovered. My friend Mark Olson from Winnipeg actually took people to this site, and he actually recovered this piece, which I had possession of for a while, and then Mark wanted it back, so I cut off a little piece of this. I was just recently shown another piece very similar to this, and we're trying to link up the various analysis for these different pieces. This is another piece that was found at that site. It shows you this metal that was recovered there. And the gifting field idea is an idea that makes more sense, that this stuff may have actually been left there on purpose. Here is a Canadian piece, 1959. As I said, this goes back a long time. The Canadians had two pieces. This was one of two huge pieces that had this huge explosion, and it was found on the edge of the St. Lawrence River. Wilbert Smith, who ran the Canadian government UFO program, analyzed this. There's a lot of documents. I was asked for these documents. I have them, and I have them on a site on my OneDrive, which describes a number of tests that were done in early 1960s on this material, which is a piece that was moved around. Pieces were cut off it, different analysis, and different people were looking at this. And again, it was very strange, but nothing was really resolved as to how do you fly a flying saucer based upon what they discovered about the metal. This is the second piece that the Canadians were looking at. This was the piece that went back to the CIA. If you're familiar with the Wilbert Smith correspondence, Wilbert Smith says at one point, he's asked about hardware. He says, it appears that you're very interested in hardware. To let you know, it is held in official hands, not U.S. Air Force. So he's saying the U.S. Air Force is not holding it. It is held in official U.S. Air Force hands. This is a piece that was supposedly shot off a UFO in 1952 in the overflight of Washington, D.C. And this piece was brought to Canada along with angel hair, if people know what angel hair was, but it had all dissolved in the box by the time it got there. Wilbur Smith sent this back and refused to identify who it had been sent back to, but there was a guy by the name of Goodspeed, Captain Goodspeed, who had taken, we know, one piece back to the Central Intelligence Agency. And then according to Art Lundahl, who ran the Weird Desk at that time, the piece disappeared. It was put into a vault at the CIA and it disappeared. This may be that piece. This is one of the more bizarre things. I knew this existed before I went to see Stan's collection. So this is one of the things I was looking for. It's called the Alien Death Threat. It is a file. And so when I got it, it was a, here's actually the file folder at the archives. And here's what the letter looks like. It's for some strange reason, it's very, very brittle. Like the paper is like hundreds of years old. You cannot touch it. It just simply falls apart if you try to touch it. And so it's in plastic, which is why you're getting this reflection off when I'm trying to photograph it. And this was written to Stan. It was kind of a bizarre sort of thing. So I'll read to you what the letter actually says. I transcribed the letter. Friedman, Stanton Friedman. So I guess he must have been German. You are to cease investigating UFOs, and you are to enter a monastery and keep silent for the rest of your life about the subject, or remember how Barney Hill and Mr. Jessup met their destiny. History can repeat itself, human. In order to convince you of the reality of this, in about the year 2000, we have manipulated behind the scenes event so that the Arabs will launch a nuclear missile attack against Israel and start World War III. Wait until then to see the truth. We are the DERO, D-E-R-O, and Jessup died because he discovered what prevented human abductions by our crafts, by anti-gravity tractor beams. Humans having ferrous material or magnetic material on their person, as in HOB nail boots and stainless steel implants, stainless steel watches and stainless steel watch bands, cannot be captured or lifted into our crafts because of the following. Gravity particles of our tractor beams are converted to photons within and upon entering ferrous and metallic materials. The photons become trapped in that material. Also iron and steel and magnetic attracting alloys of the same, and are converted to thermal energy and heat up the material. Such materials on a human person can heat up to the point where the hot metal or liquid or gas from melting or vaporizing can severely injure or kill the human specimen. In case of our programmed slave Whitley Strieber, we removed all such metal from his person, shoes, etc., before we tractor beam lifted him aboard our craft. So we prefer human species without such materials on their person to capture intact humans. Our crafts are propelled by positive gravity beams, which repel instead of attract. We operate mostly at night because the sun emits negative gravity particles of attractive gravity, which reduces our ship's drive force, since positive gravity and negative gravity forces cancel each other out, neutralize each other. Now that you know our secret in part, you must be silent for the rest of your life. Otherwise, you will face the fate of Whitley Strieber. You know of our agents, the MIB, androids, and robots. Be silent, or you will have a visit that will ensure your silence by inserting a control device in your brain, foolish human. So as crazy as it is, this is a letter that Stan got, and I guess a lot of people will go there just to view this one very bizarre letter that he got, supposedly from aliens threatening Stan's life. Here's another one. I mentioned this in prior broadcasts that Bill Moore, Stanton Friedman had a lot of contact, and it all had to do with the Roswell crash, which Stanton Friedman actually found some of the initial witnesses that sort of verified the fact that something really had happened. And there was a book that that was put out, which is a very important book, which I keep telling people you have to realize the importance of this book and how the UFO story unraveled. That is called The Roswell Incident by Charles Berlitz and Bill Moore. Was released in about 1980. This is when the U.S. intelligence contacts Bill Moore, as they did with Tom DeLonge, and offered him a bunch of different people, and he was put in contact with people in various agencies that provided him all sorts of material. It all came right after, days after this book was released. This book was extremely popular, and this gives you the indication. After 2 years of discussion, Harper and Row has finally come through with an option contract on a book. This is Stan writing with me and co-author Bill Moore. So the first book comes out. They make a lot of money on it, and Stan is in negotiations with Bill Moore, and they're going to do another book. Not much money now, but we expect the book to sell well. Bill's first book, The Philadelphia Experiment, with Charles Berlitz, has done well here and overseas and is currently #1 in England. His second, The Roswell Incident, the one I showed you just a minute ago, is coming out within a month. Overseas publication rights have sold for over $500,000. That's just the overseas rights, mainly because Berlitz is a co-author. Columbia Pictures has optioned the movie rights for $25,000, price of $250,000. I originated the 3 main stories of this crash UFO book, which would really stir up the world. Did much of the research as well, although Berlitz did most of the writing from Bill and my effort. Our book club has already ordered 11,000 copies. A 6-figure paperback rights offer was rejected, so it should be a biggie. Even at 10, I guess he's talking 10,000 in hardcover. Bill lives in Prescott, Arizona. He later moved to Los Angeles, and then when he was out of the UFO field, moved back to the East Coast. But this is part of what you have to realize is that Stan and Bill, there was a lot of money in this book deal, and it's sort of this whole thing you're reading here actually went south, which really Stan would write an awful lot about how upset he was that he had trusted Bill Moore on these book contracts. So a lot of it came down to money. Stan, as I said, this book caused a lot of controversy. It made the U.S. Air Force do another review of the Roswell incident. They did not review Roswell again in 1994 and then again in 1997 because they had nothing better to do. They did because the President of the United States greenlighted the fact that they were going to go and reinvestigate the crash, and they were forced to go reinvestigate it, so they put out the Roswell report. It all starts in 1980 because before 1980, you have to realize that there was no Roswell. The name did not exist. Nobody knew there was a crash. It was totally an unknown situation until Bill Moore came out with that book called The Roswell Incident. You even have now presidents, when they go to Roswell, here's Barack Obama at Roswell and making jokes about being at Roswell and the aliens. Most presidents before Donald Trump would do this when they went to Roswell, New Mexico. Even Ozzy Osbourne went to the Roswell Museum, and Ozzy Osbourne from Black Sabbath was very interested in UFO type stuff. And what you have is a number of things that have come out from this. His son, Jack Osbourne, has been interviewed by my friend, Dr. J Radio in Los Angeles. And I had discovered this. I put it in my book on music called Tuned In, The Paranormal World of Music, which talks about UFOs and the connection to rock music. I had this one, how many rock musicians have had UFOs over their concert? It's actually quite a few. Ozzy Osbourne was one of them. And Jack Osbourne, Ozzy Osbourne's son, actually talks about this in a conversation with Dr. J. So I think we've got this coming up. This is Jack Osbourne.
I believe there was a big UFO sighting at a Black Sabbath concert. There was a huge one. It actually even made it on an episode of UFO Hunters. Really? Yeah, they did. Tell us about that. So I believe, I want to say it was Chicago or Illinois, somewhere in the Midwest. During one of my dad's concerts, literally, there was 25,000, 30,000 people at this outdoor venue. All witnessed this craft fly over. It was right around dusk. And there was photographs. It was a big event. Listen, if I was an alien, then I was like, hey, what are all these people doing watching this person jump around on the stage? This is interesting.
The other thing that Jack Osbourne talked about was the fact that he had been very involved with Roger Leir, and that he'd actually been involved. Roger Leir had done 17 alien implants, and Ozzy Osbourne's son was actually at the final removal, patient 17. He was actually in the room while the object was being removed from the patient. Here's him talking about that.
Oh, absolutely. I know it did, because of the documentaries coming out now, and it was kind of a big week on with Coast to Coast with Colbell talking about his movie and Patient 17 coming on. I was there and I witnessed the surgery. And kind of what led me to that has been UFOs, extraterrestrials, astronomy have always been passions of mine since I was a kid.
Now, here's a final clip dealing with Jack Osbourne where he talks about a book. And this comes down to the fact, was Ozzy Osbourne an experiencer, and were the children experiencers? So he's asked about a book that his father had provided him. Here's him talking about Ozzy Osbourne providing his son this UFO book. It's kind of a strange story.
I asked you what got you influenced in this, and you said that every time your father would come back from the tour, he would bring you UFO books or movies. Do you think that maybe he had some incident in his past, or maybe your grandparents? Did anybody in your family have? I think my dad's always been intrigued by the possibility, and we would always talk about it as a kid. And there was this one book that got given to my dad in a really kind of strange way. There's a book, like a boutique bookshop in LA, and when my dad was buying me a bunch of UFO books, apparently this guy behind the counter was like, "Are you into this? I have a book for you. I want to give you." It's basically it was like an underground book, kind of. I never saw this thing again. It was called The Matrix, and it looked homemade, like someone had Xeroxed it, and it had sketches of various types of beings, and it had all these redacted documents, top secret documents. I would say 90% of the stuff in this photocopied, like, homemade book that my dad got, I've never seen it. I've never seen it replicated in any book since, even online. I don't know where this thing came from, but this book to me was so fascinating and so, it spun me out. It had stuff about Stonehenge and why Stonehenge was actually a portal and like kind of a bit of a Stargate type thing and all this crazy. And this was well before Ancient Aliens was ever on TV. We're talking 1996. My dad gave me this book. So it was really that was and my dad he would always, I think he kind of made a bigger deal out of it. He was like, "Listen, I'll keep a hold of this book. When you want it, you just ask me and I'll get it for you." And he was, he kind of, I think he played up that, this is like a coveted document a little bit, but it really captivated my, imagination and my thoughts.
Now, the book is still around, apparently. I'm going to be on Dr. J's show maybe tomorrow, and I'll find out whether this book has been recovered, because Dr. J asked Jack about whether he could recover the book. He said the book's still around. It's in England, So we'll see where that goes and whether Jack does any more interviews as to his father's interest in UFOs. I'll leave you with these. I got a little sidetracked as often happens when I do these things on Stan, because there's so many side stories that tie into what Stan was involved in. I'm going to do some material. As I mentioned, Stan has a lot of material on Area 51, including a huge collection of letters back and forth between George Knapp and Stan Friedman, which the one set that I read were extremely interesting. Back scene stuff as to what was going on. So I'm going to do that in some of the upcoming broadcasts. And the other one I'm going to get into, the whole skeptical thing. Some people may or may not know that I actually spent a lot of time, a couple of times, looking at Phil Klass's collection of material as well, which is at the Philosophical Society in Pennsylvania. And Stan had spent a lot of time debating Phil Klass. And basically what it came down to is what happens with all skeptics. And all skeptics are basically male in the UFO community, and all skeptics, nobody changes their mind. So Stan never changed Phil's mind about anything. They just sort of backed themselves into corners. But I did discover one very interesting letter from Phil Klass, which is this one, which I will talk a little bit about. And that is that this has to do with my friend Bob Emenegger and the documentary UFOs Past, Present, Future. I did not know this. This is a letter that Phil Klass writes to the U.S. Air Force, ratting out Bob Emenegger and J. Allen Hynek. And what he states here is that J. Allen Hynek was the advisor on that movie. I did not know that documentary. And that he was getting inside information, because what Bob had told me is they could go into the Pentagon, they didn't have to sign in, they could just walk right in, they could talk to anybody they wanted, they could go on to Holloman Air Force Base, a top secret base, drive around in a car looking anywhere they wanted. They had this unbelievable access to anything. And so here we have a letter where Phil Klass is actually ratting out Kehoe, who is saying that in 1974, 1975, 1976, the government is going to drop some UFO documentaries. This goes to a theory I've had since 1989, that this is gradual disclosure, that the government is actually dropping this stuff. This is actually verification from skeptic Phil Klass that he is writing out Kehoe and J. Allen Hynek to the Air Force to basically try to get them arrested for leaking this material to Alan Sandler and Bob Emenegger. So I'll deal a little bit with the idea of skepticism and some of the skeptics that Phil Klass and others had with Stanton Friedman, because he spent a lot of time doing it. And that'll be it for today's presentation. I want to thank you for listening, and we will catch you soon.